all good, all good. You've got it now. Okay, inclusive leadership, a few, okay, 6 key ingredients. Okay, 6. So you're also welcome to, if you want to like screenshot any of these, if you share them, just tag me someplace, ideally. If not, I mean, whatever, that's your call, but you're welcome to. Sometimes it's easier to save notes that way. So step 1, the most important, without question, at all times of inclusive leadership, is know your people. Know your people. I'm just gonna move this to, oops, 2 seconds. Okay. Just gonna make you a co-host, Kai, because I didn't do it before. Then you can let people in. I just want to adjust my gallery so I can see everybody. All right. Make sure you're muted when you come in. All right. Know your people is the most important, and it's also one of the most challenging angles to any kind of inclusive leadership thing. But at the front lines of that, of know your people, is we see a lot of language out there as far as everyone is welcome. As leaders, we want everyone to be welcome. Of course we do. We want everybody who comes into our space to feel like they belong, that they're safe there. So a reach in the language that I've seen as we've shifted kind of more into a normalization around inclusive marketing specifically is this: everyone is welcome. And I wanted to talk about this specifically because it's harmful, flat out harmful. And here's why. It's basically impossible to create a space where everyone will truly feel safe and like they belong. And that is a hot cup of tea to drink sometimes, because you want people to feel safe. How could I, even as a leader, know everything I need to know about everybody in the room? So the first angle is you've got to know who's there. And when we're saying everyone is welcome, we're signaling, yes, everyone is welcome, but diverse groups can look at that messaging and look at the leadership and be able to like, kind of seeing right through you. I'm kind of seeing that it's maybe not possible, and maybe they're like, what's going to happen once I'm inside? You know, how am I actually supported inside of the group? So in DEI strategy specifically, this know your people matters huge, and it really comes down to like how the successes in it happen in the top 2 tiers of leadership. And in when I do DEI strategy, the specifics of it is that oh yeah, you got that, Kai, is sort of like, what's the knowledge, what's the capacity, and what's the competency within leadership to know who's on the team. So do they know and understand the needs of transgender folks? Do they know and understand the needs of biracial people? Do they know and understand the needs of people with visible and non-visible disabilities? So when it says know your people, that's what it comes down to, is the leadership has an understanding of who the people are, and you've got connections as far as communication goes around anybody touching DEI for them to understand who's in the room and who they're supporting. So instead of just welcome everybody, the trick is to find the champions, as we know. Find the champions and then celebrate them within the team. And how do we find the champions? Through culture audits, for sure, is one way. It's not always super accurate if it's self-representing. People don't want to self-represent, but that's one way to really, it's a big key identifier, is to tune into the team, what's happening, what's winning, and what's succeeding. And then here's the twist to the whole thing. This, in seeing the champions and celebrating with them, it'll give you a temperature read on who is maybe needing a bit more from you. And this part gets a bit forgotten. There's a reason I made it small underneath it here. This piece gets forgotten. So a lot of the time what can happen is that organization will focus really intensely on who the champions are, And it's really easy to get your champions on board. And then they're like, but how do I get everybody else on board? How do I know where they are? And it's this action that I call decentering. I mean, everybody calls it decentering. I don't know why I just said it like that, but anyway, it's decentering, right? It's the ability inside of this to be like, all right, I know who my champions are. I know who's out there and they're super on board with this kind of thing, but who is outside that? And it's decentering the champions, it's decentering yourself and the ability to go in, know who you're looking for, who's in the room. We know that we've got X percentage of transgender team members, or I know that we've got biracials, focusing on those two right now, but that's, whoever it may be that's inside your room, what do they need from you? And how do you engage that? And you might be thinking, and again, I talk fast, so, reach out for me for questions for any of this, but then you might even be thinking in that space of like, okay, well, how do I do that without singling them out or tokenizing? Because tokenizing in a space like this can be really easy to do. Well, we've got one Black team member who doesn't seem to be engaged in the DEI initiatives, who doesn't seem to be engaged in the feedback loops or anything like that. This goes back to completely and totally your DEI strategy of top 2 tiers leadership. How can they support them? And then what's the communication linked around them? So it's not, and what in that comes this really cool system out of it. It's like a byproduct of your team. We'll use a Black team member as an example. If your leadership has a really understanding of the needs of the marginalized community, it's instinctually happens that they're not reaching out in a way of tokenism. They're reaching out in a place of humanity, of heart, because they understand that lived experience. It starts to happen very organically in that area. And in the communication strategy of it all is like, what do you have set up in place to support that marginalized group that needs the extra support? Is it our ERG? What's going on inside the ERGs then? Do you have a good communication connection to the ERG, as an example? So that's my step 1, know your people. Fundamental, super key. And this is a living, like you can create I was going to say it's a living document, because in my strategy, we created the actual document and be able to sort of keep track of what's happening and what's going on and how people are supported. But this is ongoing, always. It's one of those spinning plates you'll always have happening as an inclusive leader. Like, good, know your people, plate is spinning, then we can move on. And this we know, psychological safety. But as an inclusive leader, you are a conduit. You are the energy channel. You are literally the ultimate vibration inside your organization, inside your own leadership ability is in psychological safety. To create empowerment, to create trust, to create accountability for the organization, absolutely fundamental. So what is psychological safety? And you can pop this in the chat. I'm just going to leave this open so it's not me just giving all the answers all the time. What is psychological safety? What comes up for you? Let me just open this chat again. What does it mean to feel psychologically safe? Yeah, feelings of belonging. No negative repercussions for expressing oneself. Yes, that's it. Yeah, I know I'll be heard. Voice your opinion, being valued, an innate sense that I'm going to be okay as myself. Yeah, mentally, emotionally safety in the room. No judgment. Yes. And beyond that, it's beyond judgment too, it's this belief. Psychological safety is believing, knowing that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with any ideas, questions, concerns within the organization. That's psychological safety. It's a shared belief held by all members of the team, us most importantly as leaders, that other people on the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish you for speaking up. And that's when I say, as inclusive leaders, we're the conduit for that. We are the ones who are going to model that, to create that system, and to hold that system. You can be yourself and be comfortable about it. Yes. And in my working career, I don't think there were many opportunities. I don't think there was many times that I was able to just show up and be myself. I was a professional code switcher. Could write the book on it along with many of us, you know? Same? Yeah. Yeah. Like I would change the tone of my voice. I would just the dramatics I would go to try to fit inside what I needed to be in these working places, you know? Nobody wants to work with that. Nobody, and that's the work of being an inclusive leader is really breaking that up. So specifics, the importance of it completely is, and I mean, this we're not talking about all moonbeams and rainbows here either, but the specifics is that if your organization, if there's a discomfort in the organization to speak up about what's not working, it leaves us, you as leaders, ill-equipped to prevent low efficiency or failure inside the organization. We don't know, right? We don't know what's going on inside the place. It's like people, when they don't feel comfortable talking up about initiatives that aren't working, projects that are a little bit sticky, the organization can't see what's wrong. And then where do we find out when something's wrong? As an example, that might be too vague of a question, but in my experience, when we find out something's wrong is in an exit interview. That's when leaders are like, oh, I didn't know. Why did you say anything? And they're like, there was no way I could have said anything, you know? Why? Psychological safety wasn't there. They didn't feel that it was. Exit interviews, they can tell you so much about what was wrong too late in the game. So this piece is wildly important that we are actually channeling psychological safety. So just a few 4 tips for creating that psychologically safe workplace. And I get really high level on these, but one is really, and this seems so kindergarten, I know, but it really is, yeah, attrition, yeah, you nailed it, is to make it a priority. Speak up about it, like model it by practicing empathy inside of your organization. As a leader, this is fundamental to psychological safety, is that you're speaking into it. You are breathing oxygen into the value it has to you as an individual and to you within the organization, that it matters. And what does that require? Whole lot of humility. Whole lot of humility comes into for us as leaders to create psychological safety. The second one, the tip is to create honest and actionable space for people to speak up. And this sometimes, if you're coming, this can take healing. So a lot of the times it's like, you can't just throw out a anonymous feedback loop and expect the team to just jump on that and tell you everything that's going on, because damage has been done. So sometimes in order to create that honest and actionable space for people to speak up, we have to kind of work backwards a little bit and see what areas need to be healed. This goes back to know your people, know who needs a little bit more from you in order to create these honest and actionable spaces for people to speak up. Normalize the acceptance of fresh and wild new ideas. So when the team has a sense of normalization around, oh, we're allowed to just express new ideas. Doesn't really matter how wild it is. We're allowed to do that. It's normal to do that. They themselves are less likely to other somebody else for doing it. Because as a collective, the team is going, oh yeah, no, that's cool. That's how we roll here. That's a big part of psychological safety. And this one's so challenging. I know it. I feel you on this, but embrace productive conflict. Embrace productive conflict. And how you can do this, and this is me side-eyeing bias training as a lot of organizations first reach in DEI, is in, yes, to bias training. I'm not dissing in any regard, but teaching a team how to engage in healthy discourse is incredibly powerful when we're creating psychological safety, right? Teaching them how to disagree and then creating a system around that as a leader and as an organization where the system and the organization will hold you. It's okay to disagree. And here's what we've got set up for when that happens. Do we have moderators in place? Is there how are we talking about this so that it's a healthy discourse? Embracing productive conflict is the hardest one for me. Yeah. as a conflict avoider for my own psychological safety in the past. Exactly. And that's actually a really, Andreas, am I saying your name right? Andreas? That's actually a really good point too, Andreas. Awesome. And thank you for bringing that up, because it's so valid, that sense of being like somebody who has a trauma narrative inside them around conflict. They're not going to show up to a conflicted situation and just express themselves. So doing some kind of training and work with with your team around healthy discourse can be really phenomenal there. It also helps you understand your people and see who may be in a trauma relationship like that with themselves, with their narrative. I know it well. I've done a lot of trauma-informed training, of what might else be needed to support your team. This is when it gets really, really colorful and really, it fluctuates. Who's in the room changes, what you need to do changes with it. There's no cookie cutter approach to it. Right? All right, so let's move on to 4. Super high level there, I know. This one, these two twinnies, emotional and cultural intelligence. These two twinnies are these forever. These are your forever. They're another one of your spinning plates that you're always going to be checking in on, being like, how am I doing on my emotional intelligence? What else do I need to understand about cultural intelligence? This is the area that you, as leaders, we develop space to be attentive and adaptive. Agility in inclusive leadership, which we need a lot of agility to be inclusive leaders, plays a big part in this area of the emotional and cultural intelligence. And as an example, and this, I know who's in the room, this will help too, because who do you need to actually tune into and what do they need? Who's in the room is going to tell you that. And as an example, I was on a panel a couple weeks ago talking about how, and it was with 12 other beautiful Black folks, talking about how we make Black History Month every single month. Such a great topic and conversation. And we started talking about cultural intelligence naturally and what leaders need. And someone had brought up that as an example, for years, they have been very vocal with their employer going in to say, I do not take July 4th off. I take Juneteenth off. That's what I need. That's the cultural intelligence that I need from you as an organization. Now, Juneteenth is a holiday, but for years, he's been making that choice and self-advocating. So for you as a leader, you can look back at your own team and see, what adjustments do you need to make in that area for cultural intelligence on the simple basis of holidays? If that's one change that you made in your company going into Q2, was what holidays are happening and what sort of support do the different identities in your organization need? It's a good developmental area there. Another example I can put through, and this one's a little bit sensitive, but is the invasion on Ukraine. So leaders I've been working with, one of the first memos or chats that I had with people was around, do you have any team members or clients who are descendants of the former Soviet Union? Who have they themselves experienced intergenerational trauma around this? Ukrainians, yes, absolutely. But there's a lot of intergenerational trauma around the former Soviet Union as well, and what support that they would need. So we had such incredible, almost ERGs, like employee resource groups set up, but more of like open dialogue inside inside organizations, leaders saying like, look, this matters to me and I'm here to have this conversation with y'all. And this is where we, how we can support you. So I use those two as an example of just sort of how flexible and adaptive we have to be in this area when it comes to our emotional and cultural intelligence. Another spinning plate, because this part, she don't end. Emotional and cultural intelligence is here to stay. You're always going to be spinning this plate. Always, 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 always. All right, number 4 is my favorite. This is my favorite. Just question everything you've ever known. Sounds easy. Bias awareness for life. A lifer on bias awareness. Question everything you've ever known is so important, because we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know what we're inadvertently supporting what we're just being defensive of, what all of these different biases are such a trip. There's such a trip in that area. So you're always staying curious about what you don't know. And old school leadership, like for any of us who've been in the game for a long time, old school leadership has a real propensity to deflect in areas of conflict, or when they pushed against something of like bias, to deflect the bias, to deny the bias and assume that it's not there, which is harmful. So curiosity, in my opinion, is the gateway in this. Is don't believe everything you think and be curious about what you don't know. Constantly curious. And for me, and this the work that I've done with other leaders, I've seen the transformation here specifically in a really positive, cool light, because it took the pressure off of like blaming themselves or guilting themselves for not knowing that they were working, that they've been leading from a like an unconscious bias place. Shifting to curiosity was a space of like, it's lighter, it's more expansive. There's a little bit of playfulness in it to just sort of look at things through a lens of curiosity about what you haven't, and the learning. I'll say this, if I could give you some key wording with this, it's the honest ability to say and train yourself. This ties in with mindfulness completely, to be in a situation and say, I haven't thought of it that way, right? To be in a situation and say, I'm uneducated in that area. Let me do a little bit of research and can we loop back on this conversation? Like that honesty and transparency as a leader with your team is like a rocket ship for building psychological safety. It's admitting in a moment that I think this might be triggering a bias in me. I want to explore this a little bit inside myself before we continue this conversation. Can we come back to this? And that ability makes you're honestly saying, I don't know everything. I'm not supposed to know everything, but I'm trying to learn. And this ties into mindfulness, doesn't it, Kai? Big time, big time. All right. That's my, no, don't open calendar. Oh, I lost it. There we go. Staying curious. Stay curious out here. All right. This is number 5. There's 6 of them. We're doing good. Have brave and authentic conversations. And I got to tell you how many brave and authentic conversations I've had with my dog. That's why I put this picture here, because it really connected with me as far as how sometimes that's where I have the conversation. But this is so key. I say that so much in this, but it's the ability here to not shy away from discomfort. Like we have to, as inclusive leaders, be the ones who are willing to have the brave and authentic conversation. Brene Brown talks about it. There's thousands of podcasts she's put out about this specific piece of this, and we are really socially programmed to shy away from discomfort, right? We're socially programmed to kind of not look at the messy corner of the room and focus on something that might be a little brighter and a little happier. And as leaders, if we consider ourselves leaders, and as we're doing the work of inclusive leadership, it's our job to shine a bright spotlight on what's uncomfortable and figure out what we need to know inside that space. And then normalize your personal commitment to it. Like as a leader, being able to normalize that you welcome conversations that challenge the status quo. It's a big step. It's a big step to creating psychological safety. It's a big step for building trust and accountability inside the organization, inside your own leadership. And, just being able to openly say that you take it seriously, that you want to create containers that hold people accountable. That's a big one for sure. And where I've seen successes, where I've seen failures in DEI strategy is here. It's where leaders just kind of look at the big sticky parts and go, let's talk about that next month. They don't want to really get uncomfortable with it. And that shows, it just ripples across a whole organization. So, and this comes with time, creating this really open, brave conversations. And because your best step foot forward is, without question, it's your ability to not shy away from discomfort. As an inclusive leader, we get very, very comfortable having the uncomfortable conversation, saying the things that need to be said, and with empathy and with mindfulness, you know. And what do we need to do in order to do that is deep education. Deep education. Winging it gets us only so far in inclusive leadership. It gets us only so far before eventually it can catch up. And what you don't know, and then you're in a situation and it's like, yeah, and you're in over your head. So my cue, and I say this, yes, obviously, I'm an inclusive leadership educator. I'm the founder of the Anti-Oppression Academy, which is a 5-month program designed for inclusive leaders. So I come from that space, but it really is just in the work that I've done with leaders. It's something I've really learned. The deep education, collapsed time, decreased stress, and made them more effective out the backside. And that's so important. Constantly unlearning and relearning in order to ethically and authentically hold space for brave and honest conversations. And then the last one is mindfulness. And this, in my opinion, I'm a yogi, I still find mindfulness to be tricky. To catch it in a moment, it is like, I don't know, we'll talk about it in a second. I find it so challenging. I find it so challenging, and maybe because my brain wants to move fast and I think I have solutions, and I just need to slow it down. But one thing I've learned fundamentally is that we really, as inclusive leaders, need to put mindfulness in our dominant hand and never put it down. It stays with us always, in all movements, in all fashions. So we're going to talk with Kai now. We can debrief if anybody has. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I just came at you with a whole bunch of words. View. Over here. All right. Take a breath. Any questions, any comments? Did anything come up there that you want to just kind of be like, herm about? And you can unmute yourself if you want. You can private DM me. Always so consciously aware of overwhelming in my dialogue. All right, groovy. I'm here. I know that was a lot of information that just went in your brain. So email me afterwards if something comes up, for sure. Now, I think, Kai, I can pin you. And see if I do this right.
Yeah, so I am spotlighted.
Yeah. There we go. There we go. All right. Hi, Kai.
Hi. So now I want to do a deep dive on all of those slides, not just the mindfulness one, but maybe that's for another time.
Oh my God. Even when I was writing the slides, I was like, is this too much? Is this not enough? Is this too much? Is this not enough? You're always in that space. So like, I just want to go deep. I mean, in the academy, and even when I work with clients, naturally, I spend extensive amount of time around all of that and more. So, but let's talk. Kai, first of all, give us a little intro, who you is, what you do.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces. Good to see some new faces. So I started meditating regularly back in 2007. And that was really, I feel like I was just up against a wall and I needed something. Like my old patterns, there was a lot of healing that I needed to do. And the mindfulness was so helpful for just helping settle the physiology, for giving me some space. So I was responding more than reacting. This wasn't really even, a cognitive choice. It's just like I needed something that was supportive, not just in the moment, because we all have lots of tools if we need to distract ourselves, if we need to check out for an evening, like we have those tools, but those were helpful in the moment, but they weren't helping me grow over time. And so my own experience with mindfulness has been so incredibly healing. I spent my first part of my career as a scientist, and working on really exciting things, like working on creating drugs for people who would die otherwise. So really meaningful work. But I was working, not just myself, but everyone around me. We were so in our heads. Like, our bodies were just something to move our heads around so we could do like important work. And understanding that the body is important, our emotions contain intelligence, helping us understand that when a leader is acting, non-inclusively, abusively, et cetera, like that's not okay. And our emotions are really important to help us guide us towards what is healthy for us, what is inclusive, what is sustaining. And so that and then the DEI work just builds on top of that, because it can't just be what's healthy for one group of people. It can't just be what's healthy for people who are just like me.
Yeah, and this is when the connection between inclusive leadership and mindfulness really amps up. Know who's in the room, but you've got to be tapped into mindfulness practice in order to really authentically connect with who's in the room.
Yeah.
Right? Like in order to actually kind of make space. I love how you bring it up. I love that language of responding more than reacting.
Mm-hmm.
Like responding more than reacting. That nails it for me. And old school leadership, or as I call it, old school cringe leadership, is really built on reaction.
Yeah.
Right? It was really built on who cares if they're not happy, fire them, go find somebody else. Like that's so through my career, how I saw mirrored all over the place with that sense of it was always just reacting. And I think mindfulness ties into inclusive leadership through what you mentioned there, which was healing. Like we're creating containers for ourselves as leaders to heal, and then creating containers for the people that we lead to heal in moments as well. So in our 20 minutes to workshop this, keep it crunchy, as I like to do, like keep it, 1 hour, let's pop it in, pop it out kind of thing. What are we looking at? What do you see as being a way, how can people practice mindfulness in a moment as leaders to be more in responding mode rather than reactive mode? What's a tool?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. Let's just pick one or two though, right? So one I like is just taking a pause. So if you are a leader and something surprises you, annoys you, blindsides you, just taking a pause before reacting can help get you out of that reactive phase and into, like we have this, amazing forebrain that we can use to like think and reason through things. And by just taking a pause, we can actually access that brain instead of going with all of our own patterns of reactivity. And we all have them, right? Just like, oh, wait, this is surprising. Let me just take a moment. And that moment could be literally one breath. That moment could be saying, you said earlier, I need to think about this and we can come back later.
Yeah.
Like that moment could be any length that you need it to be.
I like that. Take a pause. And again, it seems so basic, but when I refer back to how I was as a previous leader a lot. In that moment, there was no pause. And even if the pause was there, it wasn't focused on the things that it should have been focused on. It wasn't focused on like, what could I be doing wrong right now? Or where am I not necessarily operating a space to decenter myself and to take care of the other person in this environment. So pausing, yes. What else? Take a moment, pause, breath, have a moment, find the language to say, I would like to loop back on this conversation. I don't know everything I need to know, or I just need a minute to sort of think about my biases in the situation or whatever it may be. What else do you find to be helpful?
Another one I like is from Tay Ming Tan, who is a former engineer. And he has a practice called Just Like Me. And so he recommends, especially if there's a moment of conflict, we know like everything you've talked about is like being inclusive means being able to move through conflict productively. And sometimes just remembering our common humanity is really helpful in like bringing the temperature down. I might not like what they said. I might not like what they did, but can I remember that they are still a human being just like me?
Othering,
yeah,
right? It's being able to tune into our own instinct to other people in a situation. And I got a real bee in my bonnet about othering. I talk about this quite a lot lately, as far as DEI educators who other alternate ways to do the work of DEI.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we trying to tear down? It's everybody. We need all the tools that we can get. So that common humanity in it, again, inclusive leadership. This is another spinning plate you've got going on as far as like common humanity. Am I in touch with the humanity of the situation? Am I trigger response to dehumanize somebody else? The example that came straight to the top of my head right there was the whole term Karen, like the resident Karen or whatever. I view that as it's dehumanizing. It's not connection to the common humanity, and it's othering. That's how, in my experience, how I view that. So I like that moment of just being like pausing. Am I connected to humanity on this moment? Am I triggered to other somebody in this situation? Those are good. What else?
I think one of the other things that's kind of counterintuitive that comes up is when we want to become more inclusive of other people and we start to learn more about what the challenges another group has experienced. Sometimes we need to deal with our own stuff first. Sometimes we have to deal with all the ways that we've been excluded, that we've been harmed. And that needs to happen not as an end to the current conversation, because a lot of times you'll say, well, these are all the things I had to do to survive, to get where I was. So why is this group having a problem with it now? And so you may need to take your own time to work through, wow, here's all of the, oppressions that I've had to experience and live through in order to show up for anybody else. So I think a lot of times DEI is termed as, okay, here's all the programs that an organization is going to do. But if we're not doing our own work, if we're not doing our leadership development, then those programs, they're going to do some good, hopefully, but they're probably not going to be as effective as they could be without the interchange as well.
Yeah, and I connect with that because in my DEI strategy work, it's always the first piece I look at is the top 2 tiers of leadership, which I spoke of before, of what's going on there in order to understand how effective the full-scale DEI strategy could actually even be from that scope. And I like that sense of being like, take the pause, you're in the moment. You're like, no, I am not an old school leader. I am an inclusive leader. I am modern and I am here. I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to take a pause in this moment. I'm going to connect. Am I coming from a place of common humanity? And then where is my self-work in this?
Yeah.
Like, where is my self-work and my leadership development and my understanding of my healing in this? And this for me is when my next step would be decentering.
Right. Because if we can't understand who we are and what we've been through, how can we even begin to understand someone who might have had a different experience?
Yeah.
Who has different identities than us, who has struggled with different things.
Yeah. I connect with that fully. So in the academy, one of the first pillar of the academy is self-work. And a big piece of that is first this, work on yourself. But then the next is understanding the marginalized experience.
Yeah.
And it's like really going deep into helping people understand the marginalized experience. Because how are you going to lead folks if you don't know what their experience is? And as a white folk, you'll never know what it was like to grow up Indigenous, right? Naturally, you'll never know. So it's, this piece of that really matters. And all of that ties into mindfulness, which is interesting because I didn't really think of it that way.
Yeah.
Super interesting. And they're like such rapid fire moments that would happen. Hey, like it'd be so fast where I'd be in a situation and you've got to have that emotional intelligence and the cultural intelligence to know yourself enough to like pause. Am I being a piece of humanity here? Where am I in my self-work journey? And then be able to move forward. Super interesting.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments around mindfulness, practicing mindfulness as inclusive leader? Any stories even of times where you've been like, I think I nailed it, or I don't think I nailed it, if you want to be totally honest with it. But anything that comes up there, I just want to kind of open the space a bit in case anybody does have something. This part was hard for me. I think, yeah. And then when I first started really shifting a bunch of years ago towards inclusive leadership, this part was tricky because naturally, as a person who grew up in a, like, I shouldn't say naturally, it's ridiculous, but I grew up in an abusive environment. There's a lot of trauma that I had to process. So having to kind of go through that first in order to lead more inclusively, that was a really tricky, not instinctual. It took quite a long time. I had to be very patient with myself. And at times I wasn't, but then I learned I needed to be. And that's what I teach now is patience as inclusive leaders, because it's not going to come instinctually. It's going to take time. But that piece is so fundamental. And I say that because that mindfulness part is going to really help when we get to decentering ourselves in order to lead more effectively, and decentering ourselves in a space of being like, what do I need physically, emotionally to take care of myself in order to keep going in this work, which is what we'll talk about on Wednesday.
Yeah. And in mindfulness, there's a concept of not knowing. And this is, it ties into like, can I be curious? Right. And you mentioned earlier, when we can be curious when we don't know something, it just opens up so much like freedom and space.
Yeah.
And this is in a contrast to the way I was brought up. The way many of us were brought up is we have to know everything. We're a leader because we're an expert. And as soon as we're not an expert in something, then, well, we're not competent. And then that brings up all of these feelings of, fear of our self-worth, survival even. Yeah. And for me, this was one of the hardest things to switch with. Like, cultural competence is about humility rather than having to know everything. And that instinct was so freeing once I finally got it. It took a while.
It does.
It took a while.
It does. It does, though. It takes a long while to get some of this. Yes. I love that. Okay. Any advice on empathetically and effectively challenging someone who might not be as far in their DEI journey? Any phrases that are good at starting the convo? Ooh, that's interesting. Kai, I'm actually just.
Yeah, I will say before deciding on that, especially if you're in a marginalized position, really think about your goal, your role, and what you can do without losing your soul.
Say that again.
What is your goal? What is your role? And what can you do without losing your soul?
That was my takeaway for the day. Got it in the last 7 minutes. That's amazing. Like, I need to process that. What is your goal? What is your role? And what can I do without losing my soul?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to just do something reactive that has this whole back end thing that happens that could suck your soul right out of you, right, that you're not ready for.
Or you burn yourself out because they're just never going to hear you.
Yeah, great question. Any phrases that are good at starting the convo? That to me is dependent on who the convo's with, what has been said beforehand, and what the temperature is of the conversation. I'm gonna think on that one though. Considering goal, role, etc. is what I can think about when I take a moment to not react. Yeah, that's a really strong action item. Like, because language helps naturally. We evolve through better understanding of like what thoughts in our head. And that really helps that moment of being like, I've taken the pause, but I'm not just like thinking about the hockey game or my dog. Where am I in the pause? In the pause, I'm thinking about the goal role and the soul. Yeah. So another one, a DM. In your experience, what do most senior leaders think of the whole concept of mindfulness and the importance of it?
It depends. That is changing.
It is changing.
Very much changing. A lot of executive coaches are bringing mindfulness to their clients. So it just depends. But we're in a better state than we were even 5 or 10 years ago.
And I'll say it in a really direct way. They disregard it. Bringing up mindfulness to leaders, especially C-suite leaders that I work with, it takes a certain read of the room sometimes I say it in ways that are like, I'm talking about mindfulness, but I didn't say mindfulness. So now you're at the table and having the conversation, but you don't know what we're talking, there is a really there's a really broad disregard of it altogether. But yeah, like Kai said, that's changing. It is, and part of, I mean, if you're here coming from through the DEI space, that's part of our role. In my opinion, it's part of our role is to open the normalization of mindfulness being part of top 2 tiers tasks, ways that they're evolving, conversations that they're having. Yeah, great question.
And if you ever, if you want somebody to talk to your executives about mindfulness, I've done that a lot. So hit me up.
Definitely. And you all have contact to Kai too as well. So yeah. How do these conversations, would you come in and just do a consult on mindfulness specifically?
I mean, I would want to know how it ties to their goals, and I would need a champion for sure. But I grew a mindfulness program in one organization by really speaking to the science behind it, because that was their language. And what I found at the beginning, I would talk to leaders who were like, yeah, I practice mindfulness, but I don't want anyone to know about that because it sounds pretty woo-woo. And over about 3 years of the work, I had leaders who were willing to come and speak about their mindfulness practice and how it helped with leadership. So there might be someone in the room already who practices mindfulness, but do they have the psychological safety, even at the executive level, as an executive? Do they have that psychological safety to talk about it yet?
That I've experienced. That right there, I've experienced where I've gotten in and worked with C-suites and that's what's come through. Oh, you do. Oh, you are practicing, but it only came through a private interview.
Yeah.
They did not bring it up collectively. They didn't want everybody else to know on that. But I can say the leadership teams that I work with, the ones who do have a grasp of mindfulness and are openly discussing it, at this point, from what I'm seeing, they have the most connected, future forward DEI strategies in place. Like I'm seeing the results of them embracing that and growing it. Goals and roles are dynamic as career changes. I like the framework for thinking about how my past ways of not losing my soul don't work with my current goals and roles. Yes.
Evolution.
Yes, to evolution in the work. Oh, I love that. That's such a win. Yeah, a big part of my work is we celebrate all the wins. You have to, otherwise we're just like, it takes your soul. You have to. Very cool. Any other thoughts? I'm going to send an email out, as I said, with the recording and all that jazz. And on there, I'm going to put a couple resources that I think will be helpful to this, as well as I'll make sure you have Kai's contact information. So you've got that as well. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading private message of people leaving. Yeah. How was that? That's how I roll. We in, we out. We talk about stuff, then we go back to our day. Kai, thank you for sharing space with me today. Thanks and with everybody who's here. Thank you to everybody who showed up live. This is so fabulous. And I will see you tomorrow at the same time to talk about habits and actions specifically, which is going to all fold into what you're doing for mindfulness and all that jazz as well. Ciao, friends. Thanks, Kai.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
You're welcome. Look at all that gratitude. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.